The day Laura handed me the divorce papers is etched into my memory like a scar. I was 25, full of optimism despite the occasional rocky moments in our 3-year marriage. I thought we'd figure it out, grow together, and build the kind of life people dream about. But when she slid the envelope across the kitchen table, her face devoid of emotion, I realized how wrong I'd been. "I don't love you anymore," she said, her voice flat, as though she were reciting a line she'd rehearsed. At first, I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, sharp and suffocating. "What do you mean?" I finally managed, my heart pounding. "We can fix this. We just need—" "There's nothing to fix," she interrupted, her tone colder now. "It's over." Her detachment was the worst part. There was no fight, no anger, just indifference. She refused to elaborate, dodging my questions with a practiced ease that made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. By the time she walked out the door, I was left with nothing but unanswered questions and the hollow echo of her absence. I reached out to my parents, James and Evelyn, seeking the comfort I so desperately needed. They weren't perfect, but they were my family. Surely, they'd support me through this. But each call went unanswered, each voicemail ignored. I even drove to their house, knocking on the door until my knuckles ached. The curtains shifted, and I caught a glimpse of my mother peering out before quickly retreating. They were home, but they weren't opening the door. I tried Sophia, my younger sister, thinking she might have some insight. Her number went straight to voicemail. A text followed minutes later. "Sorry, can't talk. Busy." No explanation, no empathy, just silence. At first, I convinced myself it was temporary. Maybe they didn't know how to respond, or maybe they thought I needed space. But days turned into weeks, and the silence remained. When I tried calling again, I was met with blocked numbers. When I visited their home again, the locks had been changed. The betrayal from Laura was devastating, but the abandonment by my family was something else entirely. They had cut me off without so much as an explanation, leaving me adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. I replayed every interaction, every memory, trying to pinpoint the moment I had lost them. But no matter how much I analyzed, I couldn't make sense of it. The isolation consumed me. I stopped going out, stopped taking care of myself, stopped answering the phone when friends reached out. Depression wrapped around me like a shroud, and for a while, it felt like I'd never escape it. The world moved on, but I was stuck, replaying the same scenes over and over in my head. Laura leaving, my parents turning their backs, the quiet ache of being utterly alone. Eventually, it was my friends who pulled me out of the darkness. They showed up uninvited, dragging me out of the apartment for coffee, for walks, for anything that forced me to engage with the world again. One friend, Mark, became my lifeline, always knowing when to push and when to simply sit in silence with me. "Michael," he said one evening over beers, "you can't let this define you. You're better than this." "I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted, staring into my drink. "Everything I built, it's gone." "Then build something new," he said simply. "Start over." That idea stuck with me. At first, it felt impossible. How do you rebuild when everything has been taken from you? But as the months passed, I began to see glimmers of possibility. Cooking, which had always been a hobby, became my therapy. I'd lose myself in the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the aroma of simmering sauces, the satisfaction of creating something tangible and good. It was during one of those late-night cooking sessions that the idea hit me. A restaurant. A place where I could channel my pain into something productive, something meaningful. I began sketching out ideas, dreaming of menus, and imagining a space where people could come together over good food and laughter. A place where loneliness couldn't reach. The dream kept me going, giving me purpose when everything else felt meaningless. Slowly, I started piecing my life back together. The scars from Laura's betrayal and my family's abandonment didn't disappear, but they began to fade, overshadowed by the determination to create something new. Looking back, those years were some of the hardest of my life. But they were also the crucible that forged me into someone stronger, someone who could stand alone and still find value in the world. The pain was a part of me, but it didn't define me. And as I took my first steps toward building the future I envisioned, I made myself a promise. No matter what, I would never let anyone take that away from me again. Opening my first restaurant was a turning point, the culmination of years of struggle and determination. I'd named it Evelyn's Table, a bitter nod to my estranged mother, whose suggestion of naming it after the heart of the home had stuck with me. It was a strange choice, considering she'd been absent for years, but it felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. The restaurant was a modest place at first, tucked into a bustling part of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every detail, from the menu to the decor, was a reflection of the life I was rebuilding. I poured myself into it, spending long days in the kitchen and even longer nights balancing the books. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. It was during one of those hectic dinner shifts that I met Megan. She was sitting alone at a corner table, a glass of wine in one hand and a book in the other. Something about her caught my eye. Not just her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful, but the calm confidence she radiated. She wasn't there to impress anyone or chase some fleeting excitement. She was there for herself. "Everything okay?" I asked as I refilled her water glass. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "More than okay. This risotto is incredible. Did you make it?" I nodded, a little caught off guard by the compliment. "I did. Glad you're enjoying it." "You should be proud," she said, her tone earnest. "This place has soul." It wasn't the kind of thing I expected to hear from a customer, but her words stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, Megan became a regular, always ordering something new and leaving glowing reviews on every platform she could find. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask her out. Our first date was simple, a walk through the park and dinner at a quiet bistro. We talked for hours, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't shared with anyone. About Laura, about my family, about the years of pain and the struggle to rebuild my life. She listened without judgment, her empathy a balm I hadn't realized I needed. "You've been through so much," she said softly, "but look at what you've built. That says a lot about who you are." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I'd defined myself by what I'd lost. Megan saw something different, someone who had survived, who had turned his pain into something meaningful. Being with her made me believe in that version of myself. 3 years later, I proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture, just the two of us, sitting in the same park where we'd had our first date. I pulled out a simple ring and told her she had given me something I never thought I'd have again: hope. She said yes, her smile lighting up the evening like a sunrise. Our life together wasn't perfect, but it was happy. Megan's unwavering support became the foundation of everything I did. She encouraged me to dream bigger, to expand the restaurant into something more. With her by my side, Evelyn's Table grew into a thriving business, and soon we opened a second location, and then a third. What started as a modest venture became a hospitality empire, with each new milestone bringing us closer to the life we had envisioned together. When our son Ethan was born, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle. He was a bright, curious child who brought joy into every corner of our lives. Watching him grow up was a daily reminder of what I had fought for. Not just survival, but a life filled with love, laughter, and connection. There were moments when the ghosts of my past crept in. I wondered if my parents knew about my success, if they had stumbled across the name Evelyn's Table and realized its significance. Did they think of me at all? Did they regret cutting me out of their lives? Or had I been so easily replaced by the comfort of siding with Laura and Ryan? Megan would catch me in those moments of quiet reflection, her hand finding mine as if to anchor me. "You don't owe them anything," she'd remind me. "You've built this life without them." She was right, of course. I had built this life without them, and I was proud of it. But a small part of me couldn't help wondering what they would say if they saw it, if they saw me. I didn't have to wonder for long. The restaurant's success caught the attention of a local TV station, which reached out for an interview. They wanted to showcase my journey, from heartbreak to building a business empire. At first, I hesitated. Sharing my story felt vulnerable, almost too personal, but Megan encouraged me to do it. "People need to hear this," she said. "You could inspire someone." The interview aired a week later, a polished segment featuring my family, my business, and the life I had created. Megan and Ethan were there, smiling beside me, the picture of happiness. It felt like a victory, a public declaration that I had risen from the ashes and found something better. I didn't know then that the interview would open a door I thought I'd closed forever. The interview aired on a Thursday evening, and by Friday morning, the restaurant was buzzing with new customers. People wanted to taste the food they'd seen on TV, to experience the warmth of Evelyn's table firsthand. It was a whirlwind of excitement, and I threw myself into the chaos, cooking dishes and greeting guests with a renewed sense of pride. I wasn't prepared for what happened the following week. It started with a call from my assistant, Grace. She hesitated, her voice uncertain. "Michael, there are people here to see you. They say they're family." My heart sank. Family? The word felt foreign to me now. Megan was my family, Ethan was my family, but the people I had grown up with? I hadn't spoken to them in 2 decades. Did they give their names? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "James, Evelyn, and Sophia," she said softly. I froze, the weight of those names hitting me like a freight train. My parents. My sister. After all these years, after all the silence, they had decided to show up, uninvited and unannounced. "Tell them I'm busy," I said, my voice clipped. "They can make an appointment." Grace hesitated again. "They said they won't leave until they talk to you." I sighed, the knot in my stomach tightening. Part of me wanted to send them away, to have security escort them out and slam the door on this chapter of my life for good. But another part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, was curious. Why now? What did they want after all these years? "Fine," I said reluctantly. "Send them to my office." When they walked in, I was struck by how little they had changed. My father, James, still had the same stern expression, though the lines on his face were deeper now. My mother, Evelyn, looked as polished as ever, her appearance carefully curated as though she were meeting a business associate rather than her estranged son. Sophia trailed behind them, her posture awkward, her eyes darting around the room like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "Michael," my mother began, her voice warm but hesitant. "It's so good to see you." I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably. "It's been a long time," I said finally, my tone flat. "We saw the interview," my father said, cutting to the chase. "We were so proud of you. What you've built, it's incredible." I raised an eyebrow, skepticism creeping into my voice. "Proud of me? That's funny. You didn't seem so proud when you cut me out of your lives." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasping the strap of her handbag. "Michael, we didn't come here to dredge up the past. We came to reconnect." "Reconnect?" I repeated, incredulous. "After 20 years of silence? You expect me to believe you suddenly care about reconnecting?" Sophia spoke up for the first time, her voice hesitant. "We've missed you, Michael. We've been keeping up with your success, and we thought maybe it was time." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Time for what, exactly? To pretend the last 2 decades never happened? To gloss over the fact that you chose Laura and Ryan over me? My father bristled, but my mother reached out a hand to calm him. "Michael, we made mistakes. We know that, but we'd like to make amends." "Amends?" I said, letting the word hang in the air. "And what does that look like to you? Meeting my wife and son? Playing the doting grandparents after all this time?" "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. "We'd like to meet them, to be part of your life again." I laughed bitterly. "You want to meet Megan and Ethan? You want to walk into the life I built without you and pretend you were there for any of it? That's rich." My words hung heavy in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in my mother's eyes, but it wasn't enough to soften the anger burning inside me. James cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We're here because we care about you, Michael. We've always cared. Is that why you ignored my calls for months? Why you changed the locks and blocked my number? Because you cared?" I stood, my voice rising. "You didn't care then, and I don't believe you care now. You saw me on TV, saw my success, and decided it was worth crawling out of the woodwork. That's not love, it's opportunism." "Michael, please," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "We just want a chance to explain." I shook my head. You don't get to explain. You don't get to waltz in here and rewrite history. You chose your side a long time ago, and it wasn't mine. They didn't argue. Maybe they knew it was pointless, or maybe they didn't have the energy to fight. My mother simply nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're sorry, Michael," she said softly. "For everything." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The emotions swirling inside me were too raw, too tangled to unravel in that moment. Instead, I turned to Grace, who had been waiting outside. "Please show them out." As they left, my mother glanced back, her expression a mix of hope and despair. But I didn't waver. They had chosen to abandon me when I needed them most, and I wasn't about to let them waltz back into my life without consequences. That night, Megan found me sitting in the dark, staring at a photo of my parents I hadn't looked at in years. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and took my hand. Her presence was enough, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone, no matter how much my past tried to convince me otherwise. The next time I saw my parents, they weren't uninvited guests at my restaurant. They were scheduled for a meeting in my office. Against my better judgment, and after much deliberation with Megan, I decided to hear them out. Part of me hoped for clarity, even closure. The other part, I suspect, just wanted to know why. When they arrived, their demeanor was different. They weren't effusive with false cheer this time. Instead, they looked cautious, even uneasy. Sophia hung back, barely meeting my eyes, while James and Evelyn took seats across from my desk. "Michael," Evelyn began, her voice soft but firm, "we owe you the truth." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "I'm listening." She glanced at James, who nodded for her to continue. "During your divorce from Laura, there were things we didn't tell you. Things we thought it was better for you not to know." "Like what?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Evelyn hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Laura was having an affair." I stiffened, the words hitting me like a blow I hadn't anticipated. "I suspected that," I said slowly, "but she never confirmed it. And neither did you." "We didn't confirm it because of who she was having the affair with," James interjected. His expression was grim, his voice low. "It was Ryan." I blinked, stunned. "Ryan? My cousin Ryan?" Evelyn nodded, her face pale. "Yes. It started shortly after your wedding. By the time she filed for divorce, she was already involved with him." Anger flared in my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. "And you knew this the whole time? You knew, and you said nothing?" "We thought it was the best thing to do," James said defensively. "We didn't want to make things worse for you." "Worse for me?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought it was better to let me spiral into confusion and self-doubt, to cut me off entirely, rather than tell me the truth? How exactly does that help me?" Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears. "It wasn't just about you, Michael. Ryan's father, your Uncle Henry, was involved. He asked us to stay quiet, to avoid stirring up trouble within the family." I stared at them, the weight of their words pressing down on me. "So, you chose them. You chose Henry and Ryan over me. Your own son." "It wasn't that simple," Evelyn insisted. Henry controls everything," I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your finances, your decisions, your loyalty." "I get it now." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the sound of Sophia shifting uncomfortably in her chair. I turned to her, my gaze piercing. "And you, Sophia? Did you know?" She flinched but nodded. "I found out later, after the divorce was finalized." "And you didn't think to tell me?" I demanded. "I didn't know how," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was so complicated, and I—" "Complicated," I echoed bitterly. "Of course, because my pain was just another complication for all of you to avoid." "There's more," Evelyn said quietly, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my patience worn thin. What else could there possibly be? "Laura had a child," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "With Ryan. She's 20 now." The room spun for a moment, my mind struggling to process what I just heard. "She had a child," I repeated, my voice hollow. "And no one thought to tell me?" "We didn't think it mattered," James said, his tone defensive. You were out of her life, out of their lives. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and humorless. It didn't matter? You kept an entire child a secret from me, and it didn't matter? She wasn't your child, Michael, Evelyn said, as if that excused everything. We thought it was better this way. Better for who? I snapped. Because it certainly wasn't better for me. They fell silent, unable to answer. The betrayal was so deep, so layered, that I didn't even know where to direct my anger anymore. It wasn't just about Laura or Ryan, or the child I never knew existed. It was about the people sitting in front of me, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, choosing someone else every single time. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. You didn't just abandon me, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You erased me. You let me believe I was the problem, while you played happy families with the people who destroyed my marriage. Michael, please, Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face. We're trying to make amends. Amends? I said, shaking my head. You don't get to make amends 20 years later. You don't get to waltz back into my life and expect forgiveness because you finally decided to tell the truth. Then what do you want us to do? James asked, his frustration showing. I want you to leave, I said coldly. You made your choices. Now, live with them. Evelyn sobbed quietly as James stood, his jaw tight. Sophia followed them out, her head bowed. I watched them go, a mixture of anger, sadness, and relief swirling inside me. The truth was out, but it didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. It only deepened the wounds. That night, Megan held me as I recounted everything, her quiet support the only thing keeping me grounded. You're better off without them, she said softly. You've built something beautiful, and they don't deserve to be part of it. She was right, but the knowledge didn't make the pain any less real. I didn't sleep that night. The revelations from my parents and sister played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Laura's affair with Ryan, a child I never knew existed. The fact that my own family had chosen to protect their relationship with my Uncle Henry over me. Every piece of the puzzle fell into place, forming a picture that was more painful than I could have imagined. The next morning, I was determined to keep moving forward. I arrived at the restaurant early, immersing myself in prep work to keep my mind occupied. The rhythm of chopping vegetables and the steady hum of the kitchen helped, but only for a while. By mid-afternoon, I found myself replaying my parents' visit, anger bubbling beneath the surface. When Megan called to check in, I could hear the concern in her voice. You don't sound okay, she said gently. Do you need me to come by? No, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'm handling it. But by the time my parents and Sophia showed up at the restaurant uninvited again later that day, I realized I wasn't handling it as well as I'd thought. Grace appeared in my office, her expression uneasy. Michael, they're back, she said hesitantly, and they're refusing to leave. I felt my jaw clench. Bring them in, I said, my tone sharp. They walked in with the same air of nervous determination as before. James looked stoic, Evelyn was on the verge of tears, and Sophia seemed to shrink into herself. Michael, my mother began, we're not here to upset you. We just want to talk. You had your chance to talk yesterday, I said, keeping my voice steady. What more could you possibly have to say? Evelyn clasped her hands together, her voice pleading. We've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. We made terrible choices, but we want to make things right. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You can't make this right, Mom. You chose them over me for 20 years. You let me believe I was the problem while you played happy families with Laura and Ryan. And now, you think you can just waltz back into my life because you feel guilty? It's not just guilt, James interjected. We're proud of what you've accomplished. We want to be part of it. Part of it? I repeated, incredulous. You don't get to be part of it. You weren't there when I built it. You weren't there for anything. And now, you want to claim some stake in my success? No. Sophia finally spoke up, her voice timid. Michael, the restaurant's name. It was Mom's idea. Doesn't that count for something? I turned to her, my anger flaring. You think that gives you credit? You think naming my restaurant after Mom erases the fact that she abandoned me? That all of you abandoned me? We didn't abandon you, Evelyn said desperately. We were in a difficult position. Henry. Stop blaming Henry, I snapped. This isn't about him. It's about you. You had a choice, and you chose to protect Ryan instead of supporting me. We didn't know how to handle it, James admitted, his voice quieter now. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Best for everyone, I repeated, my voice heavy with sarcasm. Except for me. I was disposable, expendable. And now you're here because I'm successful. Not because you care, but because you want to benefit from what I've built. That's not true, Evelyn protested, her voice breaking. We do care. We've always cared. If you cared, you would have picked up the phone. You would have answered the door. You would have told me the truth instead of letting me spiral into self-doubt and depression. You don't get to rewrite history now. My words seemed to cut through them, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Finally, I stood, gesturing toward the door. We're done here. You can leave. Evelyn started to say something, but I cut her off. Grace will show you out. And don't come back. As they left, Evelyn glanced back, her expression filled with anguish. But I didn't waver. Their remorse felt hollow, their attempts at reconciliation too little, too late. Over the next few weeks, the harassment continued. Emails flooded my inbox, long, rambling messages from Evelyn, short and curt notes from James, and sporadic apologies from Sophia. I deleted them all. My phone buzzed constantly with calls I refused to answer, and I even spotted them waiting outside the restaurant more than once. It was exhausting, and it tested the resolve I had worked so hard to build. But every time I felt a flicker of doubt, I reminded myself of the life I had created without them. Megan and Ethan were my family now. The restaurant was my legacy. I didn't owe my parents or sister anything, and I wouldn't let their guilt derail the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. One evening, as I sat with Megan and Ethan at the dinner table, I looked around at the life we had built together. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Not even the people who had given me life but abandoned me when I needed them most. Megan and I sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy with the weight of an unspoken question. Should we reach out to my daughter? My parents had left behind a single piece of information after their failed attempts at reconciliation. A handwritten note with Emma's name, her college, and even her Instagram handle. It felt intrusive and calculated, like they had planted a seed, knowing I couldn't resist its pull. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Megan said softly, her hand resting on mine. Her steady support was my anchor, but even she couldn't make the decision for me. She's innocent in all of this, I said, breaking the silence. She didn't ask to be born into this mess. Megan nodded. But that doesn't mean she's ready to hear from you, or that you're ready for what might come. She was right, of course. I wasn't sure what I was ready for. The idea of reaching out to Emma brought a mix of emotions: hope, fear, guilt, and even a strange sense of longing. I had spent so long grieving what my family had taken from me, and now I was faced with the possibility of gaining something I never knew I'd lost. I don't want to disrupt her life, I said finally. But if there's a chance she might want to know me, I have to try. Don't I? Megan squeezed my hand. Only if you're prepared for her to say no. Or for her to say yes, and for everything that comes with it. That was the crux of it. Reaching out to Emma wasn't just about making contact. It was about opening a door I couldn't close again. It meant confronting the reality of her existence, the years I'd missed, and the role I might, or might not, play in her future. After days of deliberation, Megan and I decided on a cautious approach. We drafted a message together, keeping it brief and polite. The words felt clinical, but they were the safest option. Hi Emma, my name is Michael. I recently learned some things about our family, and I believe I might be your biological father. I want you to know I'm not here to disrupt your life or make demands. I just wanted to open the door, if you ever feel ready to connect. If not, I completely understand and respect your decision. Wishing you all the best. Megan read it over twice before nodding. It's honest and respectful. Now you just have to decide when to send it. That decision took another 2 days. I stared at the message on my phone, my thumb hovering over the send button. Every time I thought I was ready, doubt crept in. What if she didn't respond? What if she did? What if she hated me for being absent, even though it hadn't been my choice? Finally, one quiet evening, I pressed send. The next few days were excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, only to be met with disappointment when it wasn't her. Megan tried to keep my spirits up, but even she couldn't fully distract me from the gnawing uncertainty. Then, 2 weeks later, it happened. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone vibrated with a notification. I glanced down and saw the message preview. "Hi, Michael. I got your message." My hands trembled as I excused myself from the room, my colleagues eyeing me curiously. I stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall as I opened the message. "Hi, Michael. I got your message, and I'm honestly still trying to process everything. This is a lot to take in, but I'd like to talk." I confronted my mom about it, and she admitted the truth. "I'm not sure what to feel right now, but I think I'd like to meet you someday." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Relief, joy, and a deep sadness for the lost years washed over me all at once. I replied carefully, thanking her for her response and assuring her we could move at whatever pace she was comfortable with. When I showed Megan the messages that evening, she hugged me tightly. "This is a big step," she said. "You should be proud of yourself for taking it." Proud wasn't the word I would have chosen. I felt raw, exposed, like I was standing on the edge of something vast and uncertain. But I also felt something else, hope. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope that something good might come from all the pain. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I exchanged messages, slowly building a tentative connection. She was guarded but curious, and I respected her boundaries, answering her questions honestly and letting her set the pace. She told me she distanced herself from Ryan and Laura, needing time to process the truth about her parentage. "They lied to me for so long," she wrote in one message. "It feels like my whole life has been built on secrets." "I know how that feels," I replied. "You're not alone in this." Every message brought us closer to a meeting, though we both knew it wouldn't be easy. Emma had a lifetime of questions, and I had a lifetime of regret. But we were both willing to try, and that was more than I could have hoped for. As Megan and I sat together one evening, discussing the logistics of meeting Emma in person, I felt a strange mix of emotions: nervousness, excitement, and a lingering sadness for the years we'd lost. But more than anything, I felt grateful for the chance to start anew. "I think this could be a fresh start for both of you," Megan said, her voice filled with quiet encouragement. I nodded, my heart full of cautious optimism. "I hope so." The days leading up to Emma's response had been a whirlwind of emotions, but when she finally replied, it felt like the air shifted. Her message wasn't long, but it was monumental. She wanted to talk. She wanted to know the truth. And most importantly, she wanted to meet me someday. It wasn't a firm commitment, but it was a beginning. Megan sat beside me as I reread the message for the third time, her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. She reached out. "That's the first step?" I nodded, though my chest felt tight with a mix of relief and apprehension. "But it's just a step," I said. What if I don't live up to her expectations? What if this just opens old wounds for her?" "Michael," Megan said, her voice steady, "this isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. She's reaching out because she wants to know you. That's what matters." I spent the next few days carefully crafting my responses to Emma's messages. She was cautious but curious, asking questions about my life, my family, and why I hadn't been part of her life sooner. Each question was a delicate thread, and I tried to weave my answers with as much truth and care as possible. "I didn't know about you until recently," I explained in one message. "If I had known, I would have tried to be there. I know that doesn't change the past, but I hope we can build something moving forward." Her replies revealed a complex mix of emotions. She was angry at Laura and Ryan for lying to her all these years, but she was also wary of me. It was clear that while she wanted to know more, she was still processing the truth of her parentage and what it meant for her identity. 2 weeks after our initial exchange, Emma suggested a video call. "I think it's time we talk face to face," she wrote. "I want to hear your voice and see who you are." The idea filled me with both excitement and dread. This was the moment I had hoped for, but it also meant there was no turning back. Megan helped me set up the call, her quiet encouragement keeping me grounded. When Emma's face appeared on the screen, I was struck by how much she resembled Laura. She had her mother's sharp cheekbones and striking eyes, but there was something in her expression, a softness, a vulnerability, that reminded me of myself. "Hi," she said, her voice tentative. "Hi, Emma," I replied, my throat tight. "It's good to see you." For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Then, slowly, the conversation began to flow. She asked about my life, my work, and how I met Megan. I told her about the restaurant, about Ethan, and about the journey that had brought me to this point. She listened intently, her gaze unwavering. "I feel like I've missed so much," she said at one point, her voice tinged with sadness. "There's this whole part of my life I didn't know existed." "I know the feeling," I said gently. "But we can't change the past. All we can do is decide what to do with the time we have now." Emma nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to meet you. In person." My heart swelled with both hope and nervousness. "I'd like that too," I said. "Whenever you're ready." We spent the rest of the call discussing logistics, where and when to meet, and whether she wanted to meet Megan and Ethan as well. She decided to start with just the two of us, wanting to keep things simple for now. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. Megan came over and wrapped her arms around me, her warmth anchoring me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Hopeful," I said honestly. "And terrified." "That's normal," she said with a smile. "But you're doing the right thing." The days leading up to our meeting were a blur of preparation and anticipation. I rehearsed what I would say, though I knew the conversation would likely veer off script. I thought about what to bring, photos, perhaps, or a small gift, but ultimately decided to keep it simple. This wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up. The night before the meeting, I sat in Ethan's room, watching him sleep. His small, peaceful face reminded me of how much I had to be grateful for, even amidst the uncertainty. Megan found me there, sitting quietly by his bed. "She's going to love you," she said, her voice soft. "I hope so," I whispered. "But even if she doesn't, I'm glad I took the chance." Megan squeezed my hand, her faith in me steady and unwavering. "She's already taken the chance to, Michael. That means something." The next morning, as I prepared to meet Emma, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. This wasn't just about answering her questions or sharing my story. It was about opening the door to a relationship that could reshape both of our lives. And no matter what happened, I was ready to walk through that door. The morning of the meeting arrived with a strange calmness, as though the universe was holding its breath alongside me. I'd chosen a cozy cafe near Emma's college, a neutral space where we could talk without the distractions of either of our lives. Megan hugged me tightly before I left, whispering, "You've got this," and Ethan gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Their support steadied me as I drove to the cafe, my mind racing through all the ways this meeting could unfold. When I arrived, Emma was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. She was stirring a cup of tea absently, her gaze focused on something outside. For a moment, I hesitated, taking in the sight of her. She looked so much like Laura in some ways, but there was a quiet strength in her posture that reminded me of Megan, and maybe a little of myself. "Emma," I said softly as I approached the table. She looked up, her expression shifting from apprehension to a tentative smile. "Hi, Michael." I sat down, unsure whether to call her by name or to address her as my daughter. The word felt too fragile, too loaded with meaning for this delicate first meeting. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the silence between us filled with unspoken questions. Then she broke it with a quiet laugh. "This is weird, isn't it?" "Extremely," I admitted, smiling despite the tension. "But I'm glad you're here." "Me too," she said, her hands wrapping around her mug. "I wasn't sure I'd come, honestly, but I had to." "Thank you for giving me the chance," I said sincerely. "I know this can't be easy for you." "It's not," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the table. But I need answers. I need to understand. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Ask me anything. I'll be as honest as I can. She started with small questions about my life, my work, how I met Megan. I answered each one carefully, trying to give her a sense of who I was without overwhelming her. But then she asked the question I had been dreading. Why weren't you there? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why didn't you fight for me? The pain in her words cut through me like a knife. Emma, I didn't know about you, I said, my voice heavy with emotion. If I had, I would have done everything I could to be there. But no one told me. Not Laura, not my family. They kept you a secret. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Mom admitted it. She said she thought it would be easier if Ryan raised me. That he'd be a better dad because he was already part of the family. That wasn't her decision to make, I said, trying to keep my anger in check. And it wasn't fair to you. You deserve to know the truth. I feel like my whole life was a lie, she said, her voice cracking. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, it's all been turned upside down. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer some kind of comfort, but I wasn't sure if she would welcome it. I can't change the past, I said softly, but I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. I want that too, she said after a long pause, but it's going to take time. I need to figure out who I am in all of this. Take all the time you need, I assured her. I'm not going anywhere. We spent the next hour talking, the conversation growing more natural as the initial tension faded. She told me about her studies, her friends, and her dreams for the future. I shared stories about Megan and Ethan, careful not to overwhelm her with too much information. By the time we said goodbye, the awkwardness had been replaced by something tentative but promising, a connection. As I walked back to my car, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The meeting hadn't been perfect. There were still so many questions, so many emotions to untangle, but it was a start, and that was more than I could have hoped for. When I got home, Megan was waiting with a pot of tea and her trademark patience. I told her everything, from Emma's questions to the moment she said she wanted me in her life. She's incredible, I said, my voice filled with awe. Smart, strong, and so much more than I could have imagined. Megan smiled, her eyes warm. I'm not surprised. She's your daughter, after all. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I kept in touch, our relationship slowly taking shape. She wanted to meet Megan and Ethan eventually, but she needed time to process everything first. I understood that completely. After all, this was uncharted territory for both of us. One evening, during a phone call, Emma revealed something that sent a fresh wave of pain through me. Your parents have been in my life since I was a kid, she said hesitantly. They were like extra grandparents to me. I didn't know why they were so involved until now. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut. My parents, who had abandoned me, had been a constant presence in Emma's life. They had chosen to stay close to her while keeping me at arm's length. It was another layer of betrayal, another wound to add to the pile. I'm sorry, Emma, I said, my voice shaking. I didn't know. It's not your fault, she said quickly, but it hurts to think about how much they knew and didn't tell me, or you. We ended the call on a hopeful note, but the conversation left me reeling. The past was a tangled web, and every new revelation seemed to pull me deeper into its complexity. But through it all, one thing remained clear. I would do whatever it took to build a relationship with Emma, no matter how long it took. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something meaningful, and that made all the pain and uncertainty worth it. News travels fast in families, even fractured ones. Within weeks of reconnecting with Emma, the story of our reunion spread like wildfire. I hadn't planned for it to be public knowledge, but when Emma confronted Laura and Ryan, the fallout was inevitable. Ryan, predictably, went straight to Uncle Henry, and from there, the entire family seemed to erupt. It started with a phone call from Uncle Henry himself, a voice I hadn't heard in decades. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to face the man who had been the puppet master behind so much of my family's betrayal. When I finally worked up the courage to listen to the message, his words were both accusatory and desperate. "You've stirred up a lot of trouble, Michael," he said, his tone a mix of anger and exasperation. "Your parents were just trying to keep the peace, and now you've gone and undone all of that. Call me back so we can fix this mess." Fix this mess? The audacity of it made my blood boil. For 20 years, my parents had sacrificed their relationship with me to appease Henry and protect Ryan. Now, with the truth finally exposed, he was scrambling to maintain control. I deleted the message without responding. But Henry wasn't the only one reaching out. My parents tried again, their emails and voicemails now laced with desperation. Evelyn's messages were tearful, pleading for me to understand. "We didn't have a choice," she said in one voicemail. "Henry would have destroyed us if we'd taken your side. We were trying to protect the family." Protect the family. That phrase had become their mantra, their excuse for every terrible decision they'd made. But what about protecting me? What about the damage they had done to my life, my marriage, and now my relationship with Emma? James's messages, by contrast, were blunt and defensive. "You're dragging everyone through the mud, Michael," he said in one email. "We did what we had to do, and you need to let it go. Stop playing the victim and think about the bigger picture." The bigger picture. As if I hadn't spent years being painted out of it entirely. The only family member who seemed remotely remorseful was Sophia. She sent a long, heartfelt email apologizing for her role in everything. "I was young and scared," she wrote, "but that's no excuse. I should have stood up for you, and I didn't. I'm so sorry, Michael." Her words carried a sincerity that the others lacked, but even they couldn't erase the pain of her complicity. I replied with a simple message: "Thank you for your apology, but I need time to process everything." Meanwhile, Emma kept me updated on her interactions with Laura and Ryan. Her relationship with them was strained, to say the least. Laura, in particular, was struggling to maintain the facade of a loving mother. "She keeps telling me she did what was best for me," Emma said during one phone call. "But how was lying to me for 20 years the best thing?" I had no answer for her. Laura's decisions defied logic and compassion, and the damage they had caused was immeasurable. All I could do was listen and offer my support, hoping it would be enough. Uncle Henry's anger escalated as the weeks went on. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he blamed my parents for the secret coming out, accusing them of being careless and weak. The irony was almost laughable. Henry, the architect of my family's dysfunction, turning on the very people who had done his bidding. But as much as Henry's fury stirred up chaos among the extended family, it barely registered for me. My focus was on Emma and the fragile bond we were building. The frenzy of accusations and finger-pointing felt insignificant compared to the importance of forging a relationship with my daughter. Emma and I continued to talk regularly, our conversations becoming more open and honest with each passing week. She shared stories about her childhood, her interests, and her dreams for the future. I told her about my journey after the divorce, about Megan and Ethan, and about the life I had built from the ashes of my past. "I wish I'd known you sooner," she said one evening, her voice filled with quiet sadness. "But I'm glad we're here now." "Me too," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "It means more to me than you'll ever know." As our connection deepened, Megan and Ethan became part of the conversation. Emma asked about her half-brother, curious and excited to meet him someday. "I'd love to get to know him," she said. "I've always wanted a sibling." "He'll love you," I assured her. "He's been asking when he'll get to meet his big sister." Her laughter on the other end of the line was like music, a reminder that even amidst the wreckage of the past, there was room for joy and hope. The fallout among my relatives continued to ripple, but I stayed out of it. My parents' pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears, their excuses ringing hollow after so many years of silence. Sophia's attempts to mend our relationship were met with cautious optimism. I appreciated her efforts, but trust wasn't something I could give freely anymore. Through it all, Megan remained my rock. She reminded me to focus on the present, to cherish the progress I was making with Emma rather than dwelling on the dysfunction of my extended family. "They're just noise," she said one evening as we sat on the couch. "What matters is here, us, Ethan, and now Emma. Let the rest of them sort out their mess." She was right. For so long, I had been consumed by the pain of my family's betrayal, but now I had something worth fighting for. Emma wasn't just a connection to the past. She was a bridge to the future, a chance to create something meaningful out of the wreckage. And I wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of that. The moment Emma met Ethan, my heart felt like it might burst. She arrived at our house one crisp Saturday afternoon, her nervous smile mirroring my own. Megan had prepared a small lunch for us, nothing too elaborate, just enough to make Emma feel welcome. Ethan, brimming with excitement, had spent the morning drawing a picture for his big sister, a simple but heartfelt gesture that Megan and I knew would break the ice. "Hi," Emma said as she stepped inside, glancing around the foyer. Her voice carried a mix of hesitation and curiosity. "Emma," Ethan exclaimed, running up to her with the drawing clutched in his little hands. "I made this for you." Her face lit up as she knelt to his level, accepting the drawing with a soft laugh. "Thank you, Ethan. This is amazing," she said, her voice warm. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "He's so sweet. He's been looking forward to this all week," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We all have." The lunch was a success, filled with easy conversation and moments of laughter. Megan, as always, had a way of making people feel at home, and Emma responded to her kindness with open appreciation. Watching them talk felt surreal, as though two parts of my life that had once seemed irreparably separate were finally coming together. After lunch, Emma and Ethan played in the backyard while Megan and I sat on the patio, watching them. Seeing them together felt like a glimpse into the future, one where Emma was truly part of our family. Megan reached for my hand, her smile soft and knowing. "She fits," she said simply. "She does," I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. Later that evening, after Emma had gone back to her college dorm, Ethan asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Is Emma really my sister?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "She is," I said, crouching down to his level. "She's your big sister, and she's going to be part of our lives now." "Cool," he said with a grin. "Can she come over again?" "As often as she wants," I promised. Emma and I continued to build our relationship in the weeks that followed. She visited more frequently, each visit bringing us closer together. She and Ethan developed a bond that warmed my heart, their shared laughter a reminder that family, though complicated, could also be beautiful. But while things were moving forward with Emma, the shadow of my extended family still loomed in the background. My parents continued to send messages, their pleas for forgiveness growing increasingly desperate. Sophia reached out occasionally, her tone more genuine but still tinged with guilt. Uncle Henry, however, remained a looming presence, his anger palpable even from a distance. Word had spread through the family that I was now in contact with Emma, and he viewed it as a threat to the carefully constructed narrative he had built around Ryan and Laura. I refused to engage with him, choosing instead to focus on what truly mattered: my wife, my son, and my daughter. One evening, Emma shared something that solidified my decision to leave the rest of my family in the past. "I've been thinking a lot about what family means," she said as we sat together in the living room. "And I've realized it's not just about blood. It's about who shows up, who supports you, who makes you feel loved." She looked at me then, her expression serious. "You've done more for me in the past few months than Ryan ever did in 20 years. And Laura, I don't even know how to describe what I feel about her anymore." I reached for her hand, my voice steady. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Family is complicated, and it's okay to take your time." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just wanted you to know that I'm glad we're doing this. I'm glad you're my dad." The words hit me with a force I hadn't expected, tears springing to my eyes. "I'm glad too, Emma. More than I can say." In the months that followed, Emma became a regular part of our lives. She joined us for family dinners, came to Ethan's school events, and even helped out at the restaurant during her breaks. The bond we shared was still new, still fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. The wounds of the past hadn't fully healed, they might never, but they no longer consumed me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a belief that I could build something beautiful out of the wreckage. As I stood in the kitchen one evening, watching Megan and Emma laughing over a recipe while Ethan played with his toys, I realized something profound. The family I had always longed for wasn't the one I had been born into. It was the one I had created, the one I had fought for, against all odds. And that family was worth everything.